let's get into these examples and get some practice, right? Some just basic ones to kind of see like, well, how do we simplify? So simplify the expression to one trigonometric expression or number using these identities. Now in this one, I say the reciprocal and quotient identities. And just remember our idea to simplify things, right? We don't leave 8 divided by 4, we divide it through, right? 8 divided by 4 can be simplified to 2. We usually don't leave a fraction 3/6, where we simplify that to 1/2. So identities, if we can divide things from the top and the bottom, then we're going to want to do that, right? If I have a sign over a sign, we can simplify that to a 1. So one of the key tips that we want to think about is using that division property, trying to get the same expression in the numerator as well as in the denominator, because they're going to divide out. So just like we did with 8/4 and 3/6. So a lot of times one of the key tips is to rewrite things in terms of sines and cosines. And you can do that by using the reciprocal or the quotient identities. So in this case, I have my sine of x, that's written in sine, but cosecant of x, I can rewrite as a 1/sine. So if I look at this, I have a sine of x times a 1 over a sine of x. Well, obviously, ladies and gentlemen, sine of x is simply just over 1, right? You can always write something over 1. And so if you're going to multiply these across, you'd have sine of x over a sine of x. So we don't think about they cancel each other out, but no, they divide to equal 1. Over here, I have cosine of x equals tangent of x. Now, here's a mistake that students will make. They'll say, well, I remember the reciprocal identity, cotangent or tangent can be rewritten as 1 over a cotangent of x. And that is actually true. And this is what kind of gets confusing about simplifying identities. You're right, tangent is 1 over cotangent of x. The problem is I can't simplify this, right? Cosine and cotangent do not divide out, right? They have to be the exact same expression. So what can we do? Well, let's look at a different identity. Rather than rewriting tangent of x as 1 over cotangent of x, what about if we wrote tangent of x as sine of x over a cosine of x? Now, as you think about multiplying these across, I'm going to use these little lines to divide them out. But again, they're not canceling out, right? They're simply just saying cosine over cosine, we know divides to 1. So now, those are now going to divide to 1. And you can see that my answer is just going to be a sine of x. Now, yeah, those are divided out. So now let's go and take a look at secant. Well, I know secant can be rewritten as a 1 over a cosine of x times a sine of x. And if you just multiply these straight across, again, you're going to get a sine of x over a cosine of x. So now we just need to remember, well, what was sine of x over cosine of x? Well, remember, that's a quotient identity that represents tangent of x. Cosine over sine, again, they don't divide out, but you can see that these are going to divide into not sine over cosine, but cosine over sine. Sine over cosine is tangent, so cosine over sine is going to be the reciprocal of that, which is cotangent of x. All right, now let's get into some fun ones. So a number, anything divided by its reciprocal. What would this look like? So I guess the best way to kind of think about this is, let's go ahead and rewrite this in terms of sines and cosines. So if I had sine of x over cosine of x, and then that's going to be all divided by a cosine of x all over a sine of x. Now, what do we do when we have a fraction divided by a fraction? Some people have some things to remember, like, was it like flip, negate, flip? I don't know. I hate all those things. The main idea, ladies and gentlemen, is you want to get rid of your denominator. To get rid of your denominator, you want to multiply by a value that's going to make it equal to 1. Because like 4 divided by 1 is just 4, right? We don't need the denominator anymore if the denominator is 1. So I got to think about what can I multiply cosine of x over sine of x to get 1. And hopefully you remember anything multiplied by its reciprocal is equal to 1, right? 1 over 3 times 3 over 1 is equal to 1. 2/3 times 3/2 is equal to 1. So if you want to look at this, what we need to do is just multiply by the reciprocal. Sine of x divided by the cosine of x. And then over here, do the exact same thing. Sine of x divided by the cosine of x. Now, when we go ahead and do this, these are going to, obviously you can see that the cosines are going to divide out. The sines are going to divide out. And then here we have sine of x times sine of x. Well, again, is just like, remember, you got to think about that. Sine of x times sine of x is going to be a sine squared of x. And cosine times cosine is going to be a cosine squared. So what we have is going to be a sine squared of x all over a cosine squared of x. Now you might see that simplified there, but remember, if sine over cosine is tangent, then sine squared over cosine squared is going to be a tangent squared. So that will be a tangent squared of x. Now let's go and take a look again at this one. Same kind of idea, right? Your same thinking here is I can rewrite tangent as a sine over cosine. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'll have a sine of x, or sine of x divided by a sine of x over a cosine of x. And again, I'm just going to multiply by the reciprocal. So when I multiply by the cosine of x over a sine of x, here it's really important to remember that the sine of x on my fraction in red is in the denominator, but my sine of x over here is typically in the numerator, right? We can rewrite that as over 1. So now, as I multiply these, I'm just going to be left with a cosine of x. Because again, think about this. You can always rewrite the sine of x over 1. So you have sine of x over 1 times cosine over sine. The sines will now divide out, and that's just going to leave me with a cosine of x. Let me see if I can rewrite that one more time, because it looked like this. So we can see here, these again divide out, and then I'm left with a sine of x over 1, right? Because you can always write it over 1 times a cosine of x over a sine of x. And that's how you can see that those will divide out. That's how we just leave this with a cosine of x. All right, more fractions. You can see, guys, we need to get better at these fractions, right? It's kind of important here. All right, so in this one, again, I'm just going to rewrite everything in terms of sines and cosines. So I have a 1 over a sine of x divided by a 1 over a cosine of x. And so here, if I just multiply by the reciprocal, which is a cosine of x, you can think about it as a cosine of x over 1. So cosine of x over 1, you can see that now I'm just going to be left with a cosine of x over a sine of x. And cosine of x over sine of x, we know is going to equal to a cotangent of x. All right, now just remember, ladies and gentlemen, this is multiplying, right? Now we can go ahead and think about this in the terms of ideas is we want things to divide out, all right? And so we're not adding, so don't worry about this. Remember, we're multiplying here. So I know that if I want to rewrite things in terms of sines and cosines, a couple things we could look at this. I could rewrite this as a sine of x, and then I can multiply this times a negative. Now, 1 over tangent, you could do 1 over sine over cosine and then multiply by reciprocal, but that's like a lot, isn't it? So what about I think about 1 over tangent as negative cotangent of x? Then I say, well, yeah, I kind of remember this because negative cotangent, I can now rewrite that as a cosine over sine. And that's going to give me exactly what I want. A sine of x divided by 1 times here a negative, we can put the negative up top, doesn't really matter. You got to pick it one way, top, bottom, or outside and front. So cosine of x over a sine of x, but lo and behold, ladies and gentlemen, that's going to give me exactly what I want, is the same expression in the numerator as well as in the denominator. So therefore, this is just going to simplify here to a negative cosine of x. And the last example, I already have the 1 over sine, so I like that here, so I'll leave that. And then, but what I will do is I'll rewrite the tangent as a sine over cosine, sine of x over a cosine of x. You can see those are again going to divide out, which is going to leave me with a 1 over a cosine of x. And now we know 1 over cosine of x using the reciprocal identities is equal to a secant of x.